Well, Saudi Arabia has decided to terminate its 50-year-old petrodollar agreement with the United States.
I didn't think we'd be in phase 3 so early, but here we are. Just this Sunday, one of the biggest economic deals of the century just came to an end.
Well, everything is changing quickly for the U.S. dollar. The agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia to export oil exclusively in U.S. dollars has officially ended on June 9th, 2024.
Is the U.S. dollar about to collapse? Over the past week, a number of financial YouTubers and a few news outlets have reported that the U.S. Saudi Petrodollar Pact has ended after 50 years. Now that sounds pretty crazy, but is it true? After examining a number of articles, I was able to trace back all the reporting to one source, a Twitter/X account, Brics News, which tweeted on June 12th, Saudi Arabia's 50-year-old petrodollar agreement with the United States has now expired with no new agreement in place. Saudi Arabia will now sell oil in multiple currencies, including the Chinese RMB, euros, yen, and yuan, instead of exclusively in US dollars. Now that sounds like a monumental shift in the global financial order, right? Which we will dive into in a minute here. But with news of this magnitude, I would expect somebody from the US or Saudi government to say something, yet nothing. There's been radio silence. President Biden hasn't said anything, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, or Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Nothing. And so a few journalists have called this out and said, hey, this report doesn't look like it's true. And from what I could find, such a pact definitely exists. It was reported in the New York Times back on June 9th, 1974. Headline, Milestone Pact is signed by U.S. and Saudi Arabia. Wide-ranging calls for economic and military commission. The basic agreement was that Saudi Arabia would agree to trade crude oil in U.S. dollars in exchange for military equipment and assistance from the United States. So while this does mark the 50th anniversary of that arrangement, the existence of an expiration date I could not find. From my understanding, it's sort of we got a pact, it was made 50 years ago, and it will continue on until one side announces otherwise. So was this post misinformation? Yeah, technically, sure, yeah, it was. And this is where the mainstream media would say, oh my God, this is dangerous, they're inciting panic, we need more censorship. But in reality, the story might be a little bit more complicated.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
The petrodollar system was born out of necessity and strategic maneuvering during the early 1970s following the collapse of the Bretton Woods system, which had pegged global currencies to the US dollar and the US dollar to gold. To stabilize the dollar and bolster its global demand, the Nixon administration, led by Henry Kissinger, struck a deal with the Saudi Arabian government in 1974. The Saudis would agree to price its oil exports exclusively in US dollars and invest in surplus oil revenues in US debt securities. In return, the US guaranteed military protection and economic support to the Saudi regime. Other OPEC nations soon followed suit, solidifying the dollar's preeminence. This arrangement created a continuous global demand for US dollars as countries needed them to purchase oil, and so consequently the US enjoyed immense benefits, from lowering borrowing costs to the ability to run substantial trade deficits, and enjoying the status as the world's primary reserve currency, which grants the US significant geopolitical leverage and economic influence over other nations. However, the global financial landscape is shifting. The US Saudi Petrodollar Pact, as of the making of this video, is technically still intact, absent any announcements from either country, but notable developments are unfolding.
Foreign ministers from some of the world's major economies are meeting in Russia. The Brics group, as it's known.
The Brics Club of emerging market countries.
The Brics group.
The Brics nations.
Over the past decade or so, a group of developing countries known collectively as BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, have been determined to upend the US dollar's dominance as the global reserve currency. In 2018, they launched BRICS a decentralized multi-currency distributed payment system designed to rival Europe's SWIFT and India's Unified Payments Interface. Meanwhile, tensions between the Saudi government and the United States has deteriorated under President Biden, who said in his 2020 campaign that the kingdom should be a pariah for the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi in 2018. In 2022, the Wall Street Journal reported that Saudi Arabia is considering accepting yuan instead of dollars for Chinese oil sales. In 2023, the Washington Post reported that the Saudi prince was not too happy with the U.S., and bin Salman privately threatened to sever ties and retaliate economically, according to a classified U.S. intelligence document. Just earlier this year, in 2024, Saudi Arabia formally joined the Brics alliance, along with 4 other nations: United Arab Emirates, Iran, Ethiopia, and Egypt. And while still very much the dominant currency worldwide, the US dollar's reserve share has steadily declined over the past 20 years, according to data released by the IMF. So I guess what I'm saying is, sure, the US Saudi Pact didn't dissolve and the US dollar isn't going to collapse today or tomorrow, but there are lots of signs that this pact will end one day, and when it does, it is not going to be pretty for the US dollar or for most Americans. I mean, think about it. The reason why the Fed can be the corrupt money printing machine that it is, to prop up the banks, the stock market, the large corporations, causing the national debt to rise by $1 trillion every 100 days without completely destroying the dollar, is in part due to the petrodollar and, of course, our military, right? If you don't use our dollar, you will be blown to smithereens. But seriously, the dollar has been destroyed for almost everyone except for the most wealthy. Mainstream news isn't going to talk about this. They're never honest about the root cause of inflation, what's going on in the Fed. And once there is an alternative to the dollar, boy, oh boy, will the chickens come home to roost.
Well, what happens when countries have so much debt? Of course, the big advantage the US has had, coming back to our earlier discussion, is the US dollar, and its debt is denominated in its own currency. So technically, it can always print enough dollars to repay the debt. However, that may create dollar weakness and inflation.
Without the artificial demand created by the petrodollar system, the US would likely have to offer higher interest rates on treasury securities in order to attract buyers for its debt. With higher interest rates, borrowing for things like mortgages, car loans, and credit cards would become more expensive. Worldwide reduction in demand for the dollar would also likely lead to its devaluation, which would make imports more expensive, further fueling inflation and reducing the purchasing power of American consumers. Things like food, clothing, other essential goods would become necessarily more expensive. In addition, for retirees or those close to retirement, the combination of inflation and higher interest rates would likely significantly tank the value of their savings and pensions. A lot of doom and gloom, I admit, but it doesn't have to be this way. Other countries, like France and Britain, have survived, despite once being the dominant financial powerhouses in the world. The Roman Empire collapsed in, 476 AD, and guess what? Rome is still there. It's got great pizza, great pasta, olive oil, from what I hear. Never been there. I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is maybe we do need a monetary reset to root out the rot, so to speak. So instead of propping up a fraudulent and rigged casino, a house of cards, the US could do things like focus on a return to economic fundamentals, reducing the government budget deficit, the national debt. They could prioritize fiscal responsibility and economic diversification, rein in the military-industrial complex. We can reinvest in education, infrastructure, energy, and general projects that could be in the interests of all Americans and not just the elite. To sum it up, is the petrodollar over? No, not yet. But it is not total nonsense like some smart people in the mainstream are saying, because one day it will be over, and the earlier we address it, the higher the likelihood that we can build a stronger, fair economy for everyone. That is it for me this week. What are your thoughts about the US dollar, the national debt, the pact that we have with the Saudis? Let me know in the comment section below. I would love to hear it. If you want to support my channel, please take a second to like this video, share it with as many people as you can, subscribe. Also hit that notification bell if you're so inclined. And as always, thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next one.